best entertainment on the earth. Tune in for Comics with Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. Let's solve some problems in the comic industry. We're looking at, I always like it when people write in, they kind of give their perception of what they think some of the problems are. So here's one of those. It says, Dear Perch, letter from email, not a letter, nobody's sending an actual letter to this to the show, but email to the show. Hey Perch, as I see it, most of the problems in the comic industry stem from the fact that the big two are small divisions of companies that don't take comic books very seriously. For Disney and Warner Discovery, comics are marketing tools for movies. I don't even know if they think about them that way, but we'll continue. For some reason, people who have never read a comic book are more likely to go see the new Doctor Strange movie if they know it is based on a long-running series. That's true. That's something that's very underlooked in this entire picture, is that the comics are often used for credibility to the movie. Like, this movie is more legitimate because it's based on some things that have some longevity and some life to it. Therefore, it's got to be a better product. That is how a lot of people think. And it's an interesting factor. It begs the question, if comic books made no money at all, would these movie studios keep them running? If they're actually not just not profitable, but actually lost money. Everything, like every dollar sunk into comics was a lost dollar, let's say. Would they keep doing comics? And I kind of think they might. And they might keep doing comics for a simple reason that they are, it's marketing. It's credibility. If you say based on a comic book series, that it's like, bing, that's an extra, 2% to the box office. And to cover the cost of the comics, that's all you really need, 1-2%. But anyway, we continue with the mail. So it's important that Marvel and DC exist, but what they actually do isn't important. This is true. This in turn means that people running Marvel and DC don't care much about the books they produce, which leads to all the problems that have been discussed at length in your channel and elsewhere. You talk a lot on your channel about things that Marvel and DC could do to make better comics and improve sales, but they won't take that advice because nobody is making them. So what would it take to convince a VP at Disney or Warner that the comic book business can add real value to their company and it is worth it to take time and effort to unfuck their comic publisher? Thanks and drive safe. I appreciate that. I drive as safe as I can. In Texas, driving safe is always a moving target because people use the the lines where you're supposed to stay kind of in your lane. They use those as a very loose suggestion. It's not really anyway. And then there's a little PS here. It says, do you ever pay attention to where commercials fall in your videos? I'll be listening to a video and here's something like, what we really need in comics today is Arby's. Try our fish sandwich. Yeah, I mean, I don't. They just do that themselves. There's a notification for something. They put the ads in there, and I know I can get in there and move them, but I'll be honest, I am lazy. So there is that. Okay, so what do you need to do? Well, first off, it's going to be very hard to convince Warner Discovery or Disney that they should care about the comics because those companies are wired to think about these things as licensing decisions. So for them, it's like, well, comic books are a licensing deal. Licensing has a percentage of return, or at least a percentage of strategic value, and that's all we really care about. And right now, the comic books are checking that box, so they don't care. If comic books made zero money, then what would happen is they would look to license them out a different way. They would say, well, dump the Marvel business unit, turn it over to Disney Press, license it to IDW, and who cares what they do over there? Unfortunately, who cares what they do over there is the defining concept. So there's only two ways that might change. And both of these are bad reasons, or, both of these are unfortunately not the best. So one way it might change is if the person who is suddenly put in charge has a love and affinity for comics. That's the, I want to run something that, I have a personal, attachment to effect. There's definitely that. So that's one thing that could change and could make an impact. As Kevin Feige names his successor, and his successor is somebody who just loves comics. Okay, that's where you'd get a personal interest in things. Unfortunately, that's not sustainable. That's based on personality, and it's not what you really want to hang your hat on. But it is, it would be something. Okay, so that's one thing. The other one is perhaps a little bit better, still not great, and that's where you're able to make the argument that comic books, in addition to just giving your movies credibility, can actually provide valid market testing because the audience that is buying the comics is indicative of the audience that will go see the movies. Now, this is a hard one to prove because right now, and I know this for a 100% fact at Disney, because I have friends there. I know that this is how they think. I don't know about Discovery. But at Disney, they view the comic buying audience as a niche group of super fans, is the word they use. But when they say super fans, they kind of mean dorks. They mean weirdos. They mean, people who are into cosplay and people who are kind of weird and people who are obsessive. And they kind of go back and forth on whether this group of super fans is actually helpful or valuable or not. On one hand, they like it, but on the other hand, they worry it kind of scares away people. And it's one of the big reasons why the movies do not highlight things like San Diego Comic-Con. You would think that if the movies wanted to really kind of promote, like, Marvel fans all over the world love Marvel, they would do some footage of 5,000 fans at San Diego Comic-Con all going into the convention center dressed in cosplay, like super into those characters. But they don't do that. They never utilize that stuff in their broader marketing campaign. They don't do that because they're not sure what to make of that group. They kind of view that group as a bunch of weirdos. And so they're afraid of scaring away kind of the mass market, the normies, by highlighting the fact that there's a bunch of people who are maybe very into these characters. And so they kind of steer away from it a little bit. Unfortunately, that's very much kind of the atmosphere that comics has. So the other factor here, but if you could make a case to say, no, actually, the people buying the comic book are early adopters, but they're very much connected and indicative of the core audience. So therefore, it makes sense to focus on that audience of comic fans. It makes sense to focus more on the comics because we can do proper market testing there. If you could, make that argument, it would work. But but bluntly, that's going to be hard to do, and it requires some pretty clever people in charge of Marvel and DC who actually want to take the comics somewhere and who want to make these bigger synergies. My feeling is, in your mail, you are correct. I think a lot of the people who are working in the comic industries are very well aware that their parent companies don't really give a shit. And so therefore, they just kind of, they're just sitting there collecting a check. And part of this is absolutely the parent companies made this mistake because when they acquired the companies, when they brought them in, they did what they often do in an acquisition, and they give the C level, they give the executive team big paychecks. And the second you give like a Joe Quesada a 7-figure check, and you say this is what we're going to pay you, then it generates behavior to say what is the Joe Quesada looks around and goes, I'm never going to get a senior executive position at Disney. There's no upward mobility for me. I'm not going to become a vice president at the Walt Disney Company. He tried to go give Kevin Feige some advice, and he basically told us to go fuck off. So I'm like, I have no career path that direction. So my career path is here, and I've got a net worth that's 8 figures, and I'm able to pull down comfortably over $1 million a year working for this company. All right. If that's the world I'm playing in, I'm just going to sit here, hang out, and collect this check until I'm done. There's, by sticking my neck out and saying, hey, we should change things and we should do this or that, that only has the potential to, backfire on me. Like the odds are, things look bad for me. If I go out there and I say, no, we need to do this with the comics and we need to attach to the audience, and there's a real group here we need to focus on, and all that. If I go make a big push where that's concerned, then suddenly people from Disney are going to show up and they're going to hold me to it. They're going to sit there and go, all right, well, let's do measurable KPIs. Let's make sure, like, all right, you say you're going to get this audience. All right, so your goal for next week is that you're going to need to grow by 15%. So we're going to be tracking that next week, next year. So how do you grow that market? And these people who are in charge, Jim Lee, Joe Quesada, others, they are not business people. They don't have their MBAs. They're not sitting there going, they don't know how to do this. Their first reaction would be like, well, shit, I don't know how to grow 15%. That's not my universe. and then they get rolled out. They basically put their neck on the chopping block. If they're able to convince Disney or Warner Discovery that they could actually grow and service this market, and then they don't, they're going to get fired, and Disney will cheerfully bring in somebody else that they think could do that job. So the best thing to do is just lie low, collect your check, sit in this sweet, comfortable spot where you go to conventions every now and then. You talk about how much you love, Marvel, and you show up for executive meetings every once in a while. You talk to a Deloitte or McKinsey or somebody like that as a consultant, and they give you a readout every 2 years, and that's your job. And you wait for at some point somebody to go, hey, wait a minute, why are we still employing this guy? If I can fire this guy, and you just hope that day is as far in the future as possible. And when that does happen, you kind of enjoy your severance package for 2 or 3 years, and then you go, I don't know, you go hook up with Frank Miller and you start a comic book company, but they don't really give a shit because you're sitting on $15 million worth of cash, and you can just kind of retire and die on that money. I mean, not to be rude about it, but yeah, that's a comic industry in a nutshell. If you want to change that mix, then you're going to have to basically change some of the people inside of it to, put some incentives in play. Actually award success. But right now, success is status quo. You have to change the status quo, and then you can get back to, actually getting somewhere. But until you do that, you're going to be right where you're at. So that's where things are. Anyway, that's my view on it. So I do wish such a thing would happen because I think comics are wonderful and valuable, and I actually do think there's a lot of really easy ways that comics can sell more, do more, be more. I think that comics, there's a lot of untapped potential there. I 100% believe it. This is why I get angry, and or not angry, but this is why I object to all the channels that want to talk about how the comic industry is fucked and everything is broken, and oh my God, DC and Marvel have screwed everything up again, and oh my God, the woke agenda is blah, 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 blah. I get pissed about that, or not pissed about it, but I object to that because it's fundamentally not true. You could fix comics super easy. It's not irreparably broken. You just need to put some attention and focus on it. And if you do that, things could improve relatively fast. A lot of good things, a lot of good material, a lot of good opportunity in comics. Just need somebody, quite frankly, who cares enough to do it. And you need to have the right business incentive to do it. You've incented the people in charge to not take risks, play it safe, and they get to keep their jobs. And as long as that is the model, nothing is going to change. Anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thanks for listening.